You're listening to the Deltek podcast, the show for leaders in project-driven industries where the stakes are always high and the margin for error is zero. In every episode, we bring you the data, the experts, and the insights that help you lead with speed, clarity, and control. Now, let's get into it.
Welcome to the Deltek podcast. I'm Megan Miller. I lead the Deltek Clarity A&E Industry Report, now in its 47th year. Every year, we survey hundreds of A&E firms across the United States and Canada so that we can understand how the industry is really performing. But today, we're not here to walk through the metrics and the report. We're here to talk about what it really means, what we're hearing from firms, what's getting harder, and where there's opportunity. I'm joined today by three Deltek colleagues who each bring a different perspective to this conversation, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Bret, let's start with you.
Thanks, Megan. My name is Bret Tushaus, Vice President of Product and Technology here at Deltek. I focus on our architecture, engineering, construction, professional services products. That include Vantage Point, Economy, Workbook, and PIM, and the technology that runs underneath them. These days, I spend increasingly amount of my time on one question. Where does AI, technology, et cetera, move the needle for project-based firms like all of yours? And where is it just noise? And I think that's the lens, hopefully, I'll bring today as we look at this year's Clarity Report.
Great. Thanks. And Dawn?
Hi, thanks, Megan. I'm Dawn Gajewski, and I am Senior Director of Product Management at Deltek. I lead the front office team for our Vantage Point product, focused on the features that support the people doing the work on the front lines. But my main focus is everything project management, creating solutions that empower project managers to proactively manage their projects, predict future outcomes, and anticipate issues before they become problems. So that when a leader asks, how's that project doing, the PM isn't scrambling for the answer they already know. And something that really helps me with my job is that before joining Deltek, I spent nearly 17 years in an A&E firm. So empowering project managers is truly a passion for me.
Great. Thanks. And Linda?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. So I'm Linda Dininger. I'm on the product marketing team here at Deltek, but I've spent my entire professional career working in the A&E and even the C industry, starting first on the marketing and business development side in an architectural firm a long time ago, nearly 30 years. Then that background is actually what brought me here to Deltek in 2019, where I now focus on product marketing for several of our solutions. And I play a role in the research and planning behind the Clarity study. So I come at this conversation from both sides. I've lived the talent and the BD pressures from inside a firm, and then now I spend my days helping firms use that technology to make those same challenges a little bit better.
Great. Thanks. It's so great to have all of you here, as all of us actually came from the A&E industry in our background. So before we get into the specifics of this, I want to do just a quick round for each of you. If you could give me one word that describes where A&E firms are in 2026 based on everything that you are seeing and hearing. So just one word, no explanation, and we'll go in the same order as introductions, and then I'll round it out at the end. Bret?
My one word is bifurcating.
My word is intentional.
My word is stretched.
I would say complicated. So for now, that's a great just view of where things are. And we'll dive into a little bit of that as we go through the results. And you'll probably hear a little bit more around why those are the words for each of us. So let's start with the financial picture, because that really is the foundation that everything else really sits on. When we look at the financial performance of the industry, revenue growth is holding and firms are busy, but we are seeing that backlogs are softening and revenue growth is slightly lower than what it was last year, which is highlighting a more complicated story underneath. Operating profit seems to be leveling off. Labor costs continue to rise faster than firms are able to absorb them. And the gap between what the headline numbers are showing and that strong performance and what firms are really starting to feel and see, that gap is getting wider and wider. So Dawn, I want to start with you. And we look at this from an ERP and a project operations perspective. Where do you see the disconnect between how firms think they're performing compared to how they're actually performing? And we can look at this through the lens of project performance, maybe in terms of profitability or some of those other key metrics.
Yeah, so this is something I watched play out for years when I was in the industry, and I see it often with firms now. The disconnect really comes into that most firms are looking in the rear view mirror. They're reacting to what already happened and finding out a project is in trouble at invoice time, at month end close, and when clients start calling. By then, the damage is already done. So, why does this happen? Because project managers are not planning ahead. And I say that with empathy because I've seen that firsthand from both the time that I was in the industry and from years of working alongside firms of all sizes while I've been at Deltek. Architects and engineers become project managers because they are exceptional at their craft. They want to design buildings and they want to work with their clients. The financial side of running a project wasn't why they got into the industry. So when you put a system in front of them and ask them to plan their work, track their actuals, forecast where they're headed, there's real resistance. Not because they're not capable, but because it feels like it's pulling them away from what they really love. And here's the thing, when firms do push through the resistance and give project managers the right tools and visibility, it changes the conversation. Instead of project managers scrambling when a leader asks, "How's that project going?" they have the answer. They know where they stand against the budget and schedule. They can see what's coming, and they have an informed conversation. What I saw happen over time is that when leaders had regular check-in meetings and used that data to have direct conversations with their project managers, behaviors started to change. Project managers stopped reacting and started getting ahead of things. That's really the discipline that closes the gap. Giving project managers the right tools and visibility and having leadership that actually uses that data to hold regular and direct and constructive conversations. The accountability is what changes the behavior. And over time, those conversations can then become more targeted and focus just on those projects that need the attention and not every single project. And that's when you know it's really working.
Yeah, and that really aligns with what we're seeing, Don, not just in project delivery, but really across the business, right? Where firms that don't have that accurate and timely view into what's happening with their projects, or only looking at how some of the past projects happened, maybe pursuing projects that won't be profitable, or pursuing clients that may not have work that's coming up. And as we're seeing firms have more and more proposals that they're submitting on than what they have historically, firms really just don't have time to waste on the projects that they can't win, the projects that can't be profitable. And so really making that decision up front and making a strategic decision is really going to set them up for project success. So Bret, I want to bring you into this. And as you look across the full picture of how firms are running their business, firms that are protecting their margins in this environment, are there systems or integration patterns that you're seeing that are consistently separating those firms from the ones that may not be as successful or maybe struggling in this environment?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a pattern. I think it relates a lot to what you and Don just said in regards to, some of the techniques and the way, firms are operating. And, it's not about which ERP you bought. It's more about whether project financials, resource information, business development data live in a connected fabric or rather than sort of four disconnected places. And in my opinion, margin protection is a connection problem really before it's a technology problem. The firms that protect margin run on a single source of truth for the project and for the organization as a whole. Business development knows what's been promised. The project management organization knows what's been spent. Finance knows what's been earned. Resourcing knows who's available. And when that's one connected view, write downs, write offs, at close, stop being surprises, sort of, Dawn's point in terms of not looking in the rearview mirror, but knowing what's happening in real time. And, those things become decisions that you make at week 3 with time to act versus the end of the project when it's too late to sort of course correct. And I would say that, the firms that maybe are struggling a little bit, they aren't lazy. I think it's more about just they're not stitched together. they're running on spreadsheets between systems, monthly exports, a principal who's, the integration layer versus, some tool underneath. And that may work at a very, very small firm, but it breaks somewhere over 50 people. And, by the time it breaks, chances are margins already leaking, or that, that profitability is going in the wrong direction. And when you think about what that looks like from a more practical, successful perspective, it's backlog and pipeline connected to resource capacity. It's project financials connected to time and expense in real time, not at month end. And the other key thing here, and you're going to hear me weave AI into a lot of my answers here, is everything we're doing right now is going to enable AI in the future. So all of this connectedness and integrated data and whatnot, without that layer there, AI doesn't have anything to work on or work with. And instead of it sort of providing value, it just makes a faster version of the same disconnected chaos, if you will. So if a firm is really going to make one investment this year that protects margin, I don't think it's a new tool. I think it's about closing the integration gaps between the tools and sort of sources of data that organizations already have in place. And while that may be sort of the unsexy answer, it's really the answer that's going to move the number and put firms in a much better position down the road as technology continues to evolve.
And I think a big piece of that too, Bret, is that, we've talked about this for years, right? Of making sure that people have access to the information to be able to move things forward. So you have the system, you have the tools, but can people actually get to the data they need to do their job? And especially as AI comes into play, being able to use that in a way, if I can't see how my project's performing, I really can't leverage AI to help me make better decisions in that. So that accessibility into that information is really critical, so that on top of that, we really can leverage AI for all the things that it's intended to do to support these firms. So we think about, Bret, you mentioned a little bit about small firms, and Don, I want to come back to you for as we think about some of those small firms. Many of them may be running their business reactively right now. So what would you say is the single most impactful shift or in the process or in visibility that could help those small businesses to move from reactive to looking more out into the future, or just being more forward thinking?
Yep. So similar to what I just described, it starts with a plan. Even for small projects, it doesn't have to be complex. A simple plan that outlines the work, the budget, the schedule, and the fee gives you something to measure against. Without that, you're not really managing a project, you're just reacting to it. And once that foundation is there, then you have the visibility into whether you're tracking to that plan, and you can react. It's not first happening at month end or during invoicing. And then make regular project reviews. Make it part of your regular cadence, monthly at a minimum, but maybe even more often on projects that are at profit risk. And it doesn't require a huge or big technology investment to start. It just requires the discipline to plan the work and continue to monitor that plan so you can react to situations before they become real problems.
I think that's great. And as we talked a little bit about like not always looking backwards, but there's some looking back that can be really helpful as we move forward. So understanding how those projects performed, understanding where there were challenges, whether that was our internal teams or with clients, having that past information can be really helpful in determining where we should go moving forward. So I want to talk a little bit about, from a business development perspective, that information can really help to make better pursuit decisions, create better pricing proposals, have forecasts that are more confident. So looking a little bit closer at the client and the pursuit side of the business, business development really is where our financial pressure, the talent challenges, the delivery challenges, all of those things are coming together. And while firms are really still optimistic about growth, we are still seeing strong year-over-year growth forecast numbers. We are seeing, again, those backlogs are softening. Competition isn't getting any easier. And we're seeing that business development and proposal teams are feeling that pressure. firms actually saw a 32% increase in the number of proposals that they submitted this year, while they saw their win rates drop overall. So really having that clear strategy, knowing which clients are worth the time and effort, which ones we just need to walk away from, which projects we need to walk away from so that we're not setting us up for failure right out of the gate, will really be helpful as we're navigating some of the uncertainty in the industry. But I want to look at this a little bit more from a technology perspective. So, Bret, as we're seeing, business developers and marketers are actually leading the way for embracing AI, and businesses are also noting how firms see technology potentially impacting their ability to capture the market and their share of the market. Can you talk a little bit about what you're hearing related to AI and technology, more from a competitive advantage, and how firms are leveraging this to give them an edge in the market?
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons. I think the first one um, is it's sort of a low hanging fruit thing. When AI really became the rage 2.5, 3 years ago now with ChatGPT, there were just a lot of things that were very, very accessible for those AI tools when it came to supplementing the things that a lot of business development groups do. But I think it's further reaching than that. The work that business development groups and marketing groups done has been somewhat undervalued, I think, for quite some time. Things like proposal writing, things like qualification analysis, win-loss synthesis. These were always activities that got squeezed, so to speak, when capacity tightened and sort of put off to the side. And I think AI really gives business development and marketing teams the leverage they've been missing. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of adoption in that area first when it comes to the AI shift that we're seeing. And the advantage isn't that we use AI in BD. Most firms claim that now. The advantage is what AI lets a small business development team actually do. Maybe it's pre-qualify 5 times more opportunities. Maybe it's more tailored proposals because AI is doing a lot more of that heavy lifting in terms of specific proposals related to the context of that particular firm. Maybe it's the ability to dive deeper into market intelligence, where in the past maybe they've only had time to skim. So all of those things, I think, are where sort of a competitive shift is coming into play. And the firms that are gaining share are using AI to widen the top pipeline, qualifying more opportunities earlier with less effort, sharpen pursuit decisions, to your point earlier, Megan, in terms of really understanding the projects to go after, the pursuits to go after as a result of better go no go data driven by historical patterns or other intel that might have been difficult to get, or not very time effective to get in the past. And then the other thing too, I think it's a bit of personalization at scale, if you will. Proposal content that actually reflects more the context of the client, the company delivering the project, all of those things, not just last quarter's boilerplate with a new sort of name or image on top of it. And then if you look at some of the clarity stats, the data shows that business development and market leading AI adoption, like you pointed out, and the firms reporting market share impact are the ones treating that adoption more as a capacity multiplier, not just a productivity tool. And I think that's a very, very important distinction, because we all hear about productivity and I'm going to be able to get things done faster and whatnot. I think it needs to be looked at more as a capacity multiplier, where a 4-person BD team can now work like a 10-person one. And that becomes a bit of a competitive moat that can really differentiate that firm in the market. So I think that's a lot of the sort of reasoning and what we're seeing play out when it comes to BD being one of the early and heavier adopters from an AI perspective.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because we look at the increase in proposal volume, doesn't necessarily mean we're just going after anything. We can scale the strategy piece up front. We can scale the number of proposals, to your point, and maybe we're able to go after more strategic pursuits in a meaningful way, not just going after everything that's showing up, but it allows us to get more chances to go after the right projects, hopefully. So we think of that as scaling that capacity. There's the flip side of that, Linda, that we want to talk about a little bit, which is the capacity for the business development capacity that we don't really talk about enough. And what that's more about not necessarily the business developers themselves, but not being able to aggressively grow your pipeline if you don't have the people internally that you're able to deliver the work that you win. So how is capacity really shaping business development decisions that firms are making? And as someone who has been in the industry, has been in marketing and business development, has been through all the things that Bret just talked about and lived it yourself, how should firms look at this a little bit differently?
Yep. So obviously, this one's a little personal for me. But what I saw then and what the data is still telling us today is that there is pressure to fill that pipeline, and that can pull firms in a direction that actually makes their people problems worse. So when your project managers and your technical leads are already stretched thin and you're still saying yes to every single opportunity that comes through the door, you're not just risking, the ultimate project deadline. You're burning out the people who hold your institutional knowledge, who hold your client relationships, who, they hold your delivery reputation as well. So those are the people who are hardest to replace and most likely leave when they feel like they just can't do their best work. So what I see smarter firms doing these days is getting more intentional about where they compete, leaning into those clients and project types where they know they can win and deliver well. And a big part of that is, what's their people capacity to support those projects and making sure that they're successful at the end of the day. And that's not being conservative necessarily, but it's being smart about protecting your people in a market where everyone is submitting more proposals, like we talked about earlier, but they're converting fewer of them. That relationship aspect or that selectivity aspect are what are actually moving the needle, both for your pipeline and for your team.
That's great. And then looking at this, obviously, Dawn, from the project delivery perspective, as firms are looking to be more strategic in their pursuits and they also want to build that backlog, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see that have a negative impact downstream for projects?
Yeah. So there are a couple of pitfalls that I'm consistently seeing. First is taking on work that you don't have capacity to deliver well. I know we kind of talked about that a little bit. It sounds obvious, but it's surprisingly common, especially if the BD is driven by principals who are really optimistic about what the team can absorb. But capacity is only part of it. The other part, pitfall, is the upfront planning. I know I sound like a broken record, but the upfront planning during the pursuit to negotiate a solid scope, schedule, and fee. The plan isn't also just about the pursuit. It's your foundation for everything that comes afterwards. So when scope creep happens, when the client wants more, when changes come up, and they always do, the plan is what they can stand on. Without it, you're negotiating from a really weak position every time. And that's really what a good go, no go process will help with. It forces the business developer and operations and project managers to look at the same picture at the same time, not just, can we win this work, or do we want to win this work, but also, do we have the capacity to deliver it, and did we plan it well enough to deliver it profitably? Actually, I built a go, no go process inside of Deltek Vision when I was in the industry. And because we needed that kind of structure, it's one of the most valuable disciplines a firm can put in place when going after projects, I believe.
Yeah, and I think, as we look at the projects themselves, what we're hearing too is that projects are getting more complex. The requirements from clients are more complicated. Companies are looking to expand where the types of projects that they're working on, the industries that they're in. So there's different skills, there's different expertise, there's different delivery capacity than what firms have dealt with in the past, which really makes those upfront conversations that you're talking about, Don, whether that's in a formal go, no go, or just as part of that overall pursuit strategy, so much more important to really understand what is it that we're going after and what are we getting ourselves into here. And so, as you mentioned before, you came from 17 years inside a large A&E firm before joining Deltek. So as we talk about what's happening inside project teams, you're really interpreting this not from the outside, but you've been in this and you've worked alongside so many companies for so many years. As we look at the clarity data, it's continuing to point to challenges in project delivery. Firms are winning work, but struggling to execute it in the time frame and in the margins. And so just interested a little bit in what you are seeing in that and how that's evolved in your time here at Deltek.
Yeah. So what's happening inside of project teams right now is compounding pressure problems. Project managers are being asked to do more. They're managing projects, supporting business development, handling client relationships, dealing with staffing issues, and in a lot of firms they're actually doing the technical work as well. So the role has expanded significantly without also expanding support, tools, and training. The utilization numbers is interesting in the Clarity report. I believe it was 58.9% of labor costs are for billable work, which is actually, I think it was down 2.2%. So it sounds like capacity is available. But what it actually reflects is that across production staff, a large share of time is going into overhead activities, coordination, administration, internal meetings. They aren't billable, but they aren't optional either. The workload feels heavier because it is heavier, but not in ways that show up in billable hours. So for small and mid-sized firms specifically, the delivery problem is harder to get ahead of because there's really no structural safety net. At smaller firms, PMs are often wearing many hats. Beyond managing just the project itself, they may also be chasing down invoices, creating the invoices, leading business development activities, and oftentimes they're even maybe the resource manager across all projects. So when something is going sideways, there's really no one on the bench to absorb and help with that.
Yeah. And again,
So,
this year, more firms labeled that as their number one challenge, right? So as we ask
mhm,
firms what's their top challenge, competing priorities continues to be at the top. And it's been there for many, many years that firms are trying to juggle all these things and new things are coming in. To your point, we're not clearing things off the plate. We're just continuing to add more and put more hats in and trying to figure out if they can navigate those things. So,
right.
Dawn, as PMs are coming up through some of those technical roles, we have great engineers and great architects who, as you mentioned earlier, become project managers. We know that not a lot of these up and coming leaders have the training for the scoping and the estimating and the financial side, or even client communication. So, how is that gap showing up in firm performance? And what do you see that firms are really doing about that?
So I touched on some of that to build on it specifically. Um, from a training and development angle, the path to become a project manager in the industry has, traditionally been you're a great architect or engineer, you're staffed on bigger projects, and eventually someone says to them, "You're leading this one," and that person is talented and they're capable, but in most cases they've never been trained to scope the work, estimate the fees, read project financial reports, or even have those hard conversations with the client about budget. So the gap shows up first in the scoping and estimating. Projects get under scoped at the pursuit because a PM doing the estimate is either optimistic and lacking experience. They're thinking about the work that they love without truly understanding all of the work involved for the entire team, including the administrative and coordination. And then that's where the project erosion actually starts before they even start the project. It's in that negotiation stage. The clarity data shows that 44% of firms now have half of their project managers formally trained. That's up 4 points, which is encouraging, but it says that there's still 56% that don't. The firms that are doing really well have built in a practice around PM development, whether that's a formal PMO, a mentorship program, a defined path to become a project manager, or just really consistent and regular training. It's not a one-time event, it's a discipline. And when firms invest in that infrastructure, they're not just developing better project managers, they're also building a culture where project management is valued and taken seriously across their firm.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, as you look at some of that project delivery, the project performance, it's just so important as we're even in the early stages for the engineers and the architects before they're project managers to think about, helping them to understand the direct impact on margins, everything that they're doing. I've talked to firms that focus on helping the whole project, the whole business team to understand how they play into this role in the business. And so making sure that firms can track those things effectively and be able to see what's happening. Maybe some of that literacy starts earlier and we can help get these teams ready to be able to move those projects forward successfully. Bret, from a technology standpoint, where are you seeing the biggest opportunities for firms to really integrate technology in a way that changes delivery outcomes in practice? And really, what does that look like for a firm that has been running the same way for the last 10 years, or in some cases, even longer?
I think we could do a whole podcast on this particular subject, Megan, but let me try to capture at least a few things that I think are relevant in the context of sort of the 10-year ago firm, however you want to describe it. And I think one of the key things, and quite honestly, this applies to any firm, but technology doesn't fix delivery. It more changes what is possible. And the reason I think that's important, especially in the context of AI these days, it's, pick your cliche, garbage in, garbage out. You can't build on a foundation of sand, all of that. Putting technology on top of bad processes, bad data, bad whatever is just going to amplify the bad, if you will. And when you think about these 10-year ago firms, they largely run by, tribal knowledge, and that's just not sustainable, I think, in today's world. The senior PM holds the project model in their head. The budget lives in a spreadsheet that is 40 years old and has been evolved, and formulas have been modified and whatnot over those 40 years. Status is often updated by gut feel. Those types of things I don't think are sustainable in the world we're living in. And quite frankly, the technology that's available is more accessible and more powerful than ever to help with that. It's not replacing judgment, but it's making things more visible and making some of that visibility transferable. So if I had to, distill that down to maybe the top 3 opportunities thinking about that 10-year ago firm, I would think, Dawn's hit on it a couple times, real-time project visibilities, actuals versus planned inside the week, not 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months down the road. I think AI assisted project setup is critical as well. Taking the proposal and standing up the budget, the schedule, and the resource plan, as a draft that the PM can edit instead of building it from scratch each time. And then I think one of the other things that we're definitely seeing come to life in talking to our customers and the solutions we're building is status and reporting compression, if you will, pulling together a project review pack, for maybe a lack of a better way of describing it, automatically. So the project managers and decision makers is preparing for the conversation and making decision versus, spending hours and hours preparing data and sorting through different data. And, when you think about the 10-year ago firm, like you sort of characterize the question, in today's AI world, they're not going to jump into AI agents running projects day one. But if they can make one of these changes, like, for example, see performance on a weekly real-time basis versus after the fact, I think that single shift, and this is how I think firms should look at it, can unlock, the next 5 things, the next 10 things from a tech adoption perspective. It's all staged. And I think it's important for organizations to understand that it's okay that it's incremental and progressive over time versus, this giant boil the ocean all at once and you're suddenly an AI agent driven firm. So patience is part of that as well that I think needs to be factored in.
Yeah, and as you talk about AI, it really is everywhere in the Clarity data this year and in every conversation that we're having with firms too. So as we look at some of the results this year, 78% of firms said that they are using generative AI, but only 38% report measurable positive business impacts. And that gap between adoption and results is really the story that we're seeing this year. So Bret, you have been deep in this. Can you share a little bit about what you see that's going on in that regard?
Yeah, it's interesting because the clarity data, the 78% adoption, 38% impact, is very consistent with what you're seeing across business, period, not just in A&E industry. So I think it's important to reflect on it that way because this is a challenge that business in general are seeing as a result of AI adoption and the AI technology. Now, I would say that the 38% is, in my opinion, it's not a technology problem. I think it's more about an operating model decision more than anything else. And I think what companies and what firms need to think about is, what does operating with intent when it comes to AI and technology actually mean in practice? And when I think about the firms that I've talked to that are having some success and, maybe more in that 38%, what are they doing differently? I think one, they're picking workflows, not features. In other words, it's not a matter of asking, well, where can I use ChatGPT? Instead, it's identifying a real business problem or workflow and figuring out how can I enhance this? How can I improve this via AI? So it's not about the feature or the tool. It's actually about the problem we're trying to solve and where we're trying to gain some benefit. So that is, I think, is number one, what we're seeing. The second thing, and I sort of alluded to this already as well, but the firms that are successful right now with AI, they're investing in the data that's underneath it. AI on top of clean, connected data is leverage for organizations, without a doubt. AI on top of disconnected spreadsheets is theater at best. The 38% that we're talking about spent some of their AI budget on the boring work. And that is, building that foundation. That is getting the data cleaned up with good project taxonomy, connecting business development to delivery and resourcing, and all of sort of that interconnectivity is important as well. So AI had something real to work on because of that boring sort of data underneath work that they completed. And I think the other thing too is there's a lot of gut feel going into AI adoption these days. And I think one of the other things that we're seeing with that 38% is they're measuring. They know that their AI is helping. They know that it's saving 4 hours here per proposal or reducing project setup time by 60%. The rest of them are the ones that have adoption with no measurable impact because they're not measuring it. And I think that's key as well. And organizations may think, well, I don't have time to measure. We're so pressed and so stretched already. Do I really need to measure the value that we're seeing from some of these AI programs? Absolutely, you do, because you need to course correct. Again, cliche, you need to fail fast. If this particular AI tool or this particular workflow is not the one that's going to resonate or have a good value prop down the road, you know what? You need to make the decision quick and move on to something else. So I think those three things are really what's key: operating with intent, investing in the data underneath, and measuring what you're doing. I think that's what we're seeing differently in that 38% when it comes to actually being successful with their AI adoption.
That's great, Brett. And I think even, as you look at some of that measurable impact, it's also a way to get some of your laggards to get on board too. If you can tell me that this is going to save me this amount of time and how I can deliver my project and the things that I'm not going to have to do anymore, I'm much more likely to try that than to think that I'm going to invest this time to learn and not really know what I'm going to get out of it, right? But if you can tell me you can save me X number of hours a week and I don't have to do all the searching and the finding on my proposals in my past world, I would have been on board in a heartbeat. You wouldn't have even had to ask me twice for it, right? So that's part of the value too of measuring it, is that then you can communicate with others on your teams and tell them, this is really what we're seeing and you can too. It's not just what somebody else has done, but now you're able to do that. And one of the things that is interesting when it comes to the AI conversation is that it's not just adoption. Literacy is a big component of this as well, and it's actually showing up quite a bit in the clarity data as a workforce gap, not just a technology challenge. And so, Linda, I want to ask you on this one. How are firms thinking about building that AI fluency across their teams, and what does that mean for how they're hiring and how they're developing their teams and their staff moving forward?
Yeah, so definitely just another layer to what Brett's already highlighted, and the data and the processes and the proof points. Like, give me proof that this is actually going to work and benefit me. But a lot of times teams, those project managers, those technical staff, they're slower to change. And so sometimes they may feel like they got just AI dropped into their lap without much instruction or support of how to actually use it. So that's creating, in some cases, a lot of anxiety and not really building that fluency. So we've already talked about adoption is high, but the meaningful impact is lagging a bit. So the gap there may not be all technology, but it's a confidence and the people readiness side of things. So people need to feel confident with those tools before they'll trust them in their high stakes situations. So firms that are closing that gap are treating AI literacy the same way that they're treating professional skill. They're building it intentionally over time with real support, not just a 1 day training and a license and check it off the list. It's this constant learning thing. And then that also really matters in recruiting and retention as well, as people increasingly want to work somewhere that is um, you know, their technology forward, or they want to work where someone is genuinely investing in their growth at a firm. And how a firm approaches that AI development for their team sends a signal about whether that firm is really the kind of place that they want to work or they didn't want to stay at.
Yeah, you even think of, in the recruiting process, and we talked about this as we were going through some of the data this year. If we look back 20 years ago and the key skills that you needed to have on your resume, right? Everybody needed to make sure that they made everyone aware that they knew how to use Word and PowerPoint and Outlook and Excel, and now that's changing, right? You put those on there and now people are like, that's a given. But now how we're leveraging AI skills and expertise becomes even an advantage in recruiting for those employees that are trying to get hired, and how you can differentiate yourself in the market to be able to get hired. So I also want to look at this, Dawn, from an operational perspective and a project management. From your view and in conversations with companies, where is AI actually moving the needle for firm leaders who have been running things manually? Really, what are some of those use cases that are creating visibility and efficiency in practice when it comes to project management as well as just general operations in the firm?
Yeah. So what I'm seeing gaining real traction for project management at this point is things that are reducing the manual labor of staying informed. How do they keep visible and informed on what's going on their projects, which include things like automated project summaries, anomaly detection that flags when a project is over budget, document analysis that helps surface key data out of things like contracts or specs, and even just being able to ask questions and get quick summary of where a project stands without having to dig through reports and run those reports that they're used to having to go through. What makes this work is that it fits into how a PM is already operating, and it's not requiring right now a redesign of any workflow. They just make the information faster and more reliable. Where AI, it doesn't seem to be moving the needle yet in these areas, or where firms don't have that good, like Bret mentioned earlier, that good, clean, or consistent data underneath it. But I think as firms are continuing to build more consistent practices around project management, I think that potential is enormous in order to, help that insight on projects and deliver better projects. The practical message for firm leaders, start using with AI, or start AI cases that work with data that you already have, and just don't wait for the perfect data environment. Use what you've got, but also don't expect AI to solve process problems at this point. If the foundation isn't there, then the results won't be there either.
Yep, that's great. Thanks for that, Dawn. And I want to switch gears a little bit because everything that we've talked about today really has not only a technology component under it, but also talent as a key theme. And so, as we've seen in the results this year, staff growth slowed quite a bit this year to just 1.2% year over year. turnover is at a 7-year high, higher than what we're seeing in other industries. And so as we're looking at some of these challenges, Linda, you've been closest to some of this data this year, and curious what you're seeing in some of this information from a talent perspective. Really, we're seeing the talent shortages as the single greatest potential risk firms are facing. It's not pipeline, it's not technology, but this also isn't a new challenge. I feel like this is something that, those of us that were in the industry and now out of the industry, we've been talking about the talent challenges in this space for a very long time. But what's making this so persistent, and what are firms managing? What are firms that are managing it well? What are they doing differently?
Yep. So, what makes this persistent is that it touches every part of the business, and most firms are only addressing one piece at a time. So, you fix the hiring funnel, but then you're not developing the people. So, then they leave. You focus on retention, but you're not building the next generation of leaders. So, you've got a succession problem. They're all connected, and the ones who manage it well actually understand that. So, what I find most telling in this year's data is actually not the turnover rate itself, although that's very telling. It's the gap between the high performers and everyone else. So the high performers are running lower turnover than the industry median. And that difference at the project level means their experienced project managers are staying on the job. That means their client relationships are staying intact. There's less scrambling when someone leaves. And then all of that compounds over time in ways that show up in how well you can bid or pursue new work, how confidently can you staff the next project, and ultimately how profitable those projects actually are. So, what separates them isn't a secret necessarily, but it's a consistent investment in career development, those real conversations about where those people are headed, and succession planning that leaders are involved in and are engaged in rather than just HR managing a spreadsheet. So the industry is starting to measure it more seriously. This year, we added a new option when we asked the question, what are those KPIs that you're tracking from a human capital management perspective? We added the learning and development as one of those options for the first time this year. And immediately it landed at number 4 on that list. So that's a signal for us that firms are starting to measure something. And when they start measuring that, it means they've decided that it actually matters and something they want to pay attention to and improve upon.
Great. Thanks for that. And I've got a little bit more time here. So just a couple of quick questions. So Dawn, looking at this talent side from the delivery and operations, what's the practical impact when firms can't staff those projects adequately, or they're not able to retain those experienced PMs that Linda's mentioning? And where does that really show up first from a firm performance perspective?
Yeah. Well, it shows up first in planning the work. When you're short staffed or scrambling to fill a role, the upfront scoping, scheduling, and risk assessment are often the first things that get skipped. And as I mentioned earlier, that's really the foundation for everything. Everything else is built on. When that foundation is rushed or incomplete, you will feel it downstream. The other place it shows up is when experienced project managers leave. Firms are doing their best to backfill, and I don't want to minimize that, but there's a huge learning curve. The transition period carries a risk, especially on complex projects. And that is not a knock on the people that are stepping in. It's just the reality that it takes time to build that institutional knowledge and also that project experience. And that's why investing in retention and development matters so much. Turnover at 13.8% may not sound super alarming to some of you, but when you think about the ramp up time, the relationships that walk out the door, the impact on the projects that are in flight, it adds up and has a huge impact. So firms that recognize and invest in keeping and growing their people are the ones that are protecting the project delivery performance over the long term.
Absolutely. And the other aspect of that too is, as we talked about, this AI literacy, and that really has become more of a bigger workforce gap that we're seeing, and not just a technology adoption problem that we've been talking about. So, Bret, when you think about this, what does building that fluency across a firm actually look like in practice, especially for a small firm who may look at this as overwhelming or they're not really sure where to start?
I love this question, and I don't think you can underestimate the importance of this question in the world we're living in today, because the quicker that the staggering pace at which AI technology is moving, the gap between those of us that are on board and moving with it and those that are lagging behind is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's going to be a workforce gap that I think could be a real problem down the road, which is why I think this is such a great question. And AI fluency isn't a curriculum; it's a habit. For a small firm without a training program, the answer is exactly the same for a large firm with a training program. Give your people a real problem to solve with the tool and let them solve it. Practice beats programs every single time in the context of AI. Don't get me wrong. There's training, there's reading people can do to improve their fluency and whatnot in AI, but building is the absolute key when it comes to this world we're living in right now. I think three moves any small firm can make, or any firm, quite frankly, in 30 days, is pick one workflow per role. For example, proposal drafting for business development, project status for project managers, client communication for principals. Give people permission to use AI on that workflow during normal work hours, not as a side experiment, and set up a 30-minute monthly what worked, what didn't session. That's the entire program. I think of my own situation. I'll say it this way. I've spent the last, I don't know, 6 months or so building my AI tools, my AI operating system into my own workflow, not because anyone told me to, but because I wanted to know how it actually feels to operate that way. And that hands-on reality is what fluency is in this world we're living in right now when it comes to AI. You can't read your way into being an AI expert. You need to build something. And I think, one of the sort of real quick ways I would say this is make AI someone's job. Stop making it everyone's hobby. If you really want to move the needle forward around fluency, make it somebody's job.
Thanks, Bret. And so we've covered so much ground today, and I want to close with something practical. So if a firm leader is listening to this, they recognize their firm and what we're talking about. What's the one thing, the priority, the discipline decision that would be most impactful as they go into the second half of this year? So we're going to do quick rapid fire, one thing that you want to leave everyone with. And I will start with this from a financial perspective. Firms have to focus on monitoring the right metrics to get ahead of some of these challenges. As things are a little bit in flux in the markets today, have a plan for what does that look like when the numbers aren't where they need to be, and actually have a plan to take action. Don't just monitor for the sake of monitoring, but monitor for the sake of action. Dawn, what about you? What's the single most important thing that you would like to leave with our leaders today?
Don't manage projects in the rearview mirror only. Empower your project managers with tools that provide real-time visibility, so they're making decisions through the windshield where there's still time to react and protect the project's outcome.
Great. Linda?
Yep.
Mine would be to build your talent before you actually need it. The ones that
Mm.
grow are treating their people capacity as part of their BD strategy and not an afterthought.
Great. And Bret, we'll have you round it out.
I'm going to say something that I think firms should stop doing. Stop buying more AI tools. So many firms that I talk to have more AI subscriptions than they have true outcomes. Stop adding, start measuring what the ones you already have are doing, and double down on that to get work done. The 38% with measurable impact aren't using more tools than the rest. They're using fewer, but they're using them better. And I think that's key. Stop buying more AI tools, invest in the ones you have.
Thank you so much for that The 47th annual Deltek Clarity A&E industry study is available now at deltek.com/clarity. I encourage every leader listening to this to not just read it, but really use it as a catalyst for your conversations across your business, across different silos. Use this as an opportunity to open those conversations. The value isn't just knowing what the industry is doing, it's knowing where your firm stands relative to it and what actions you can take to really drive your business forward. So thanks, Dawn. Thanks, Bret. Thanks, Linda, for joining me today and sharing all of your incredible insight. And thanks to all of you for listening.